Global Player.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. The UN says around 100 Ukrainian civilians have successfully reached relative safety after leaving Mariopol over the weekend. Earlier, Boris Johnson told Ukraine's parliament the war with Russia is a fight between good and evil. The Prime Minister became the first world leader to address the Rada since the invasion began in February.
And in this moment of uncertainty, of continuing fear and doubt about the future, I have one message for you today. Ukraine will win.
President Biden says a woman's right to choose is fundamental and has vowed to protect access to safe abortions. A leaked document has revealed the Supreme Court is considering overruling a landmark case which legalised terminations in 1973. A former Conservative MP has formally quit Parliament after being convicted of sexually assaulting a teenage boy. Imran Ahmad Khan was convicted last month for assaulting the 15-year-old in 2008. And another P&O ferry is now being kept out of service after failing a re-inspection. Today, the company resumed tourist sailings between Dover and Calais for the first time since sacking 800 workers. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 6 points at 75.51. The pound buys $1.25 and €1.18. LBC weather: rain moving across the north this evening into the south overnight. Lows of 6 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Helen Hoddenott.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. This is Cross Question. On the panel with me tonight are the Conservative MP for Stroud, not Stroud, Siobhan Baillie, Jack Parsons, the UK's Chief Youth Officer and Chief Executive of the Youth Group. We'll be finding out what that is in a moment. I suppose it does what it says on the tin. Ella Whelan is a columnist for Spiked Online, and Stephen Pound is former Labour MP for 22 years, it says here, and former Shadow Minister for Northern Ireland. If you'd like to put a question to them, the number to call 0345 6060 973. I was going to say it seems ages since we've had a cross question, but we did a special one when I was on LBC on Sunday on the local elections, but that shouldn't put you off from putting your question to our panel 0345 6060 973, and you can text your question to 84850, and you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
I think you're entitled.
Right, let's go to our first question. It's from Lenny in Ashford. Lenny, hi, good evening. What would you like to ask?
Good evening, Iain. Good evening, panel. I am politically homeless, and mainly because of the quality of our politicians. And so do you think, because of the state of our politicians, a lot of people will join me and not bother to vote?
That's a good question, Lenny. Let's go to Jack Parsons first, because there's always been this traditional thing that young people don't vote because they're disillusioned with party politics. Do you think that's more so now than it was 10 or 20 years ago?
I think since the pandemic, young people have taken a lot of interest in politics because it's more visible. They can see it on TikTok and they're going through the feeds.
I'm on TikTok.
Oh, yeah.
Down with the youth.
There you go. And so they're starting to understand it more. However, I think there's a lot of confusion on who to vote for, why should I vote, should I get involved, do they deserve my vote?
But there's more opportunity now to find out what they stand for, isn't there? If you want to know what a particular party's policy is on X, Y or Z, you can find it on the internet. You couldn't have done that 25 years ago.
Absolutely. There's more and more resource online for you to go online, for young people to go across online, or message your local MP or the local councillor in your local area on Twitter.
Do you think that that there's a disillusion with party politics now, and that younger people tend to concentrate their interest on individual campaigns or pressure groups rather than get involved in what we would call normal party politics?
It's definitely got micro community, and it's really gone down to, okay, what party supports my interest around climate change, or what party supports my interests because my mum has just lost her job. So it's really now going focused on what is my problem and what's the issue in my community, and does that MP actually have community sense?
Ella Whelan.
I think it can probably go one or two ways in terms of whether or not people... I mean, Lenny, I'm politically homeless, I have been for many years, so welcome to the club. I think that we should... I wish we'd take a lot more of us to more of a leaf out of the French book by making our, spoiling ballots.
Sorry, Stephen's about to have a seizure, I think.
Spoiling ballots and refusing to pick the best of a bad bunch. I've always had a belief that votes are important, and that's why I don't give mine away lightly. But I think that these local elections could go one of two ways, because, local elections have, not to be disparaging, always been slightly less interesting than other elections, and people find them slightly less interesting. But we're now at a time when people are looking more closely at things that are happening in their immediate surroundings. So, like your council tax, the costs in and around your area, parking and things like that, are becoming much more important to people because everyone's had a squeeze, as we know. But also, I think that the issue of whether or not people can find information, I think, is probably slightly secondary to the fact that it's very hard still to differentiate between the two main parties, Labour and the Conservatives. They've both had similar approaches to the pandemic, with varying, degrees of slight grey areas. Neither of them have anything particularly exciting to say about the cost of living crisis. There are no clear, real dividing lines ideologically between Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson, as far as I can tell. There are some differences, but there's no real exciting break. And so I think it could be that people pay more attention, but actually I think for a lot of people it's going to be same old, I don't really care. And I don't think that's a lazy position. I think that's a problem for the political class to deal with, not the voters.
Well, let's turn to the political class. Former MP, current MP. Siobhan, you could be forgiven for not knowing that local elections were on at the moment. I haven't seen a single election poster, and we're, 3 days before polling day. Going to Lenny's question, is that part of the reason why people are politically homeless? Because the parties aren't taking a lot of interest in them?
Well, I think Lenny can be forgiven for if he was politically homeless before the unedifying last few weeks that's going on nationally, with various different sort of scandals and arguments and political parties thinking they're landing blows on each other, actually usually filters down to the public of people thinking they're all just as bad as each other. I'm out, I'm going to turn the telly off, I can't be bothered with this. I think the reality of the local elections, they genuinely do have quite a direct impact on what happens in your local community, and Jack is right. So what I would always say to people, and I don't have local elections in Stroud at the moment. I don't know why you haven't seen. It is. I mean, it definitely changes how we're approaching things, the MPs that don't have local elections in our areas. But I don't know why you haven't seen posters. But because I know that for the Conservatives that are either challenging to get new councillors in or trying to hold on to councillors, they're active all the time, and they're active all over the country. But I think what I would say to you, Lenny, is actually try and get to grips with the local person that is standing, or the three local candidates. And I hope that it's three, and I hope there's no weird backroom deals where you've got less choice because of political parties trying to eke each other out. And actually think, what do I want? What matters to me? Exactly what Jack said. What happens? What happens to my life, and how does that matter? Things like planning. We know what councils have got control of planning, bins. We know that the councils were in charge of spending out a lot of central government money in the pandemic, or they were supposed to be dishing out that money to help local businesses. Look at their track record of how they actually did that. Did they get the money out to the right people, and then make the decision from there? But I will always say, go out and use your vote if you can, use it wisely, and look at those local people. And the vote for Conservatives, what we're trying to remind people people is don't punish the local Conservative councillors for loads of national stuff that's going on, and if you stay at home, invariably it will help the Labour Party.
Stephen Pound, I mean, you've heard people over the years say a plague on all of your houses, you're all the same as each other, you're all as bad as each other. How do you convince people from thinking that basically they're right?
Well, they're not. Lenny, it's good to hear from you. And can I just say that if you don't vote, you're letting the rascals off scot-free. If there's one thing that bone-lazy, idle, venal politico would really love, is people not to vote for anybody at all.
And you're speaking as a bone-idle politico.
No, I have been. I have dipped a toe in the limpid waters of Lake Venal over the years, but I'm free now. I'm free. Yeah. But I think the point that was made earlier on about the similarity, the sort of Venn diagram between Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson, I'm sorry, it doesn't stand up to any examination. There's no way on God's green earth the Labour Party would come up with this absurd, obscene nonsense of shipping people to Rwanda while they're simultaneously taking refugees from Rwanda. No, the Labour Party is standing for things like
I think they did in 2003, to be fair.
Not to Rwanda.
No, not to Rwanda, but there was a plan to process people offshore.
Indeed, there was in France, which makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. But anyway, the point is that we're not remotely talking about that, and what the Labour Party is talking about is things like an energy cap, actually a windfall tax on the major utilities, important things like that. But the answer, I think, you remember Badgett said, the answer to, if you're mystified about politics, is to actually, have a look at it and see. Get involved. Politicians actually work for you, Lenny. You are incredibly important. I don't know if you're from Ashford Kent or Ashford Middlesex, but it makes no difference. Get in there, get involved, because if you sit on the sofa and do nothing, you're letting the scoundrels off. Get in there. Make a flipping nuisance of yourself.
But that's easy to say. But if you do get involved with a local political party, and I think it's probably the same for all of them, you go along to your first meeting, and you listen to all these people sort of arguing with each other. You think, aren't they supposed to be on the same side? And then all you ever get are begging letters for more money to support your local party.
Well, there's an element of that, but I always, on occasions like this, I always turn to Iain Dale's masterwork. Why can't we all just get on? And I think, which is available in all good bookshops. Why can't that is also available in all good bookshops. I've actually got an unsigned copy, which is apparently quite rare. Everybody talks about this consensus in local government, but there is huge divide. There are big differences. Things like local traffic networks. Massive differences between people.
Things like council tax. I mean, and look across the piece at how many Labour councils are failing compared to Conservative councils are failing. How many people have got council tax down?
Northamptonshire. I'm not sure you're on strong territory there.
That's the analysis too. Look at the councils that are providing low council tax, regular bin services. Look at actually what that's going to mean to you on a day-to-day basis. And I respect Stephen, but he immediately defaulted to the national stuff, a Rwanda policy. Local councils, as much as they like to think sometimes, with their motions.
People vote in local elections on all sorts of different bases, and a lot of people, particularly this time, I suspect, will be voting. It will be seen as a bit of a national referendum.
But Lenny
on the
was
government.
Asking for a steer on how to actually cut through.
Well, you actually want to answer the question.
Sorry.
Never happens on this show.
So, and I think that the local elections, vote locally, look at your local, and Conservatives are on really good ground on that basis.
Ella?
I think it tells you a lot that you've the suggestion that voters are simply mystified about politics, and that's why they're politically homeless and don't know how to vote. Aside from that being slightly patronising, to put it lightly, I think it's not that people don't understand what the two parties stand for, either locally or nationally. And I think you can't get away from the fact that whether or not you are thinking about your bins, you're also looking at the big things that have happened recently, whether that's the pandemic, Partygate, Ukraine, Rwanda, or anything like that. It's that we have had very little change, not just over the course of the pandemic, but previous to that, from any of the parties. And, the thing about the Rwanda policy is, sure, Labour might not have come up with that, but they were very big supporters of the European Union, who have had very similar policies in relation to trading and immigration, and, shipping people, being happy with shipping people off to Libya, being happy with Erdogan and building walls to keep Syrians out. So, please don't kind of cry me a river over Rwanda. The Labour Party can't do that because it hasn't got any political principle when it comes to immigration on that. But I think the most
Turkey's
important
not an
thing,
EU, though.
but I think it was an EU policy and an EU
What's it got to do with
agreement.
Erdogan?
I'm saying that there is a precedent of this happening. I'm completely opposed to the Rwanda policy, but it's not like this is some uniquely evil concoction from the Conservatives who are uniquely immoral when it comes to immigration. There is precedent from both parties. But I think the most important thing for most voters, and maybe Lenny can say what he really thinks, is that there are big crises happening at the moment. Cost of living crisis, the question of people's futures. Is life just going to be forever now? A move from one crisis to another and parties saying, we'll give you a bit of cash here, we'll stem that here, we can't really do much. No one is putting anything exciting on the table, and that is forever the question.
What puts you off from going into party politics? Because, you've been on this programme quite a few times over the years. You've got definite opinions. You're somebody who clearly is extremely competent. Surely party politics needs people like you.
Well, I think there's something exciting to be. How do I put this? I think the turmoil.
You prefer being a job on a stick.
Yeah, possibly. and I don't deal well with authority, Ian, so I don't think I'd listen to any whips. But there is something, one thing that can happen in local elections is that independent candidates can come through with something exciting. You mentioned low traffic neighbourhoods in the part of London where I live. That's becoming a very live issue because it's ruining a lot of people's lives from my perspective. But there is something exciting about the prospect of both parties being challenged, either by as it weirdly low turnout or people spoiling ballots and saying I'm not putting up with this, and also by a growth of independent candidates. Now at the moment we have new parties like Reform, Reclaim, Gina Miller's party, I can't remember what it's called, all that kind of stuff.
True and Fair, I think.
Yeah, I think Jeremy Corbyn's threatening to do one. None of that stuff's exciting. None of that stuff's necessarily new. I think we're crying out for something different. Whether or not that means people like me stepping into the fold, I'm not so convinced. But there has been a lack in British politics for a very long time of any new blood. It all gets sucked up by the Labour Party.
Talking of new blood, Jack Parsons. Now, you told me earlier, I hope you don't mind me revealing your age, you're 27. When I was your age, I was doing things like this at 27, and I always wanted to be an MP. It was sort of part of that path. But I suspect that is not uppermost in your mind.
No, it's not. I'm too busy walking the sausage dogs and helping young people. Look, what is really important, though, is that we go from having all the answers to all the questions, and we create conversation, whether that's with your friends, whether that's with the next door neighbour, whether that's with your local councillor or MP. I think it's really important that everyone has a voice, and how much you know about politics, that doesn't mean that you can't ask the questions. So I say to every young person, go from having all the answers to all the questions, and then that will give you the answer on election day.
Right. Thank you very much to our panel. We'll take more of your questions in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
20 past 8 on LBC. With me on the panel for this hour, Siobhan Baillie, Conservative MP for Stroud, Jack Parsons, Chief Executive of the Youth Group, Ella Whelan, columnist for Spiked Online, and Stephen Pound, former Labour MP. Jack, what is the Youth Group?
So the Youth Group is one of the UK's largest communities for young people. We have 1.7 million young people. We've put over 90,000 young people into work, and we help young people flip the duvet in the morning, get out of bed and be passionate about something.
Well, I mean, that's something that's laudable, isn't it, Stephen?
Absolutely. You know,
do you need your duvet flipping?
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. Must have a word with my daughter about this. But look, what I think was said earlier on was extremely interesting, you know, about engagement and also about retail politics and the sort of pick and mix approach to politics. I think you've got to ask yourself, what actually is politics? Because politics isn't party politics. Politics isn't just about these awful meetings in church halls and then the begging letters. I mean, where I'm in Hanwell, we've got the Hanwell Carnival on June the 18th, which is, it's not a political event, but we're bringing people in, people are involved in, this is a community issue. And I think there comes a point where community becomes politics and politics becomes community. And I think the important thing is for people to get engaged in that. And it's everything around you. And I think, I rather doubt we're going to disagree on this, but there's so much going on around us. There's so many people should be involved that the one thing we shouldn't do is sit back and do nothing. Absolutely get in there.
Right, 0345 606 973. If you want to get in there with one of your questions, we'd be delighted to hear from you. A text from Joan in Sedgefield, and if you want to text, you can do so on 84850. Joan in Sedgefield, which of course was Tony Blair's old constituency, well, that's related to her question. She says it's 25 years since New Labour was elected. Does this modern Labour Party come anywhere near to that of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, or are they just a bad tribute act? Stephen Pound, you were elected, I mean, it was 25 years ago this week,
on
wasn't
Sunday,
it?
yes, yeah, May the 4th. Yes, I remember it was a hell of a shock, I have to say, to the family, because, I was expecting to go to work the next morning. And,
did you not expect to win?
No, of course I didn't. It was, Harry Greenway was the MP there. It was Tory had a majority of about 8,000. I mind you, I'd been the mayor and I'd been a councillor and done all that sort of stuff, but of course I didn't expect to win. I mean, none of us did. We spent a lot of time playing down the expectations, and I remember on the night when we were just over at the festival hall there, Tony goes, Hove, are you serious?
Yeah.
But we didn't. But I remember I got a phone call that Friday morning from somebody who said, I want to speak to the MP. And I said, well, bloody ring him or her. And they said, no, you. And I said, oh my God, it's me. And it's, and it's that awful realisation.
And you were working for a housing association?
I was working for Pennington Churches, yeah.
And they made you serve out your notice?
Well, quite rightly too. I mean, I couldn't just walk out the door. Well, it's slightly difficult because you arrive at Parliament and the first thing you say, policeman says, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm a member of Parliament. They all say that's a slingy-rug. And I said, no, I am a member of Parliament. Oh, yeah, prove it. So I had to get my election address. We all had to get them. And then, obviously, got no office, no staff, nothing. And I carried on working for the Housing Association for a couple of hours in the morning, which, as my manager said, slightly cruelly, was more than I ever did.
Right, let's answer Jane's question. So the current Labour Party, a very bad tribute act to Tony Blair and Gordon Brown.
Look, something like New Labour, Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson, that comes along once in a lifetime, maybe once in a generation, I don't know. What we are totally different. Now, to say that Keir Starmer is a tribute act to anybody is incredibly insulting, because Keir is in a completely different place. The Labour Party is in a different place. And if I may say so, and I think perhaps we'd all agree on this, the country is in a different place. The simple answers, the basic nostrums, simply no longer apply. You can no longer say, under socialism everything will be fine, under capitalism everything will be fine. It's much, much more subtle and nuanced than that, which is why I think Keir is, in the same way that we went for Attlee after Churchill and we went for Biden after Trump, we're actually looking for somebody sensible, staid, stable, and dare I say it, occasionally slightly less than absolutely exhilaratingly exciting. And so that's very different.
Very delicately put. Ella Whelan.
Maybe it's insulting to say he's a tribute act, but I mean, I think it probably made a couple of people, mine included, jaws hang open, maybe not with surprise, but at least with the gall of it, to invoke Blair in the way that Keir did, over the last week. Not least because you'd think there would be someone whispering in his ear that at times of war, it's probably there's a reason why Blair has been conspicuously quiet for the last month or so, when he's been, previously he wasn't ever off the telly, given his opinion on this, that and the other. But aside from that, I have to disagree with the suggestion that the Keir Starmer is an attractive politician because he's he's this sort of like safe pair of hands lawyer. It's, he was interviewed on the radio this morning on the BBC, and he was asked, what have you done in the kind of, you've been in power in the position that you're in the leader of the Labour Party for 2 years. What have you got to say for yourself? And, pandemic aside, which I think everybody has a relative amount of sympathy for, the answer is not very much. And, he's been playing second best to Boris Johnson throughout the pandemic, not being able to provide any kind of serious opposition to some of the measures, more extreme measures that were brought in by the government throughout that period. He was challenged this morning and said you had on your election ticket questions about common ownership, and you sort of were riding the Corbyn wave, trying to capitulate on, trying to build on that in some way. And then now he says, well, I don't really want to talk about nationalisation, which, fair enough, but that's going to disappoint a lot of people. I think he comes across to many as someone who's just spent the last 2 years trying to move away from the stink of Corbyn.
And he's done rather well on that, hasn't he?
But not offering, we can have a different debate about whether Corbyn stank, and maybe we don't want to do that. But there is, he has not offered anything exciting.
Surely he's detoxified the Labour brand. I mean, he's no longer associated with Jeremy Corbyn. He's made a major effort on anti-Semitism in the party. He's moved the party away from Corbynism within 2 years. Now, I would have thought that that's quite something, that most of us wouldn't have expected him to be able to do that so quickly.
I suppose it depends what you think or thought the Labour Party was meant to stand for. And I think it still uses and abuses this rhetoric of it being the party of working people. It doesn't say working class people anymore. Whereas it's quite obvious to anyone that, Keir Starmer and the people around him, whether it's Emily Thornberry or people like that, are hell-bent on having moving Labour Party perhaps more towards a kind of the Blairite faction, but as a party of the metropolitan middle class. And that sounds like a cheap, throwaway comment. Lots of people use the word metropolitan as a kind of insult these days. But it really is from top to bottom, whether it's in relation to questions about nationalisation or about the kind of its fascination with not being able to tell the truth about culture wars issues like gender or things like that. It is just has nothing to offer working class people anymore.
Jack?
My opinion changes all the time on this. I always ask, how can I relate? And I've been round the table. I've had the Education Secretary over to my home to talk about youth. I was at a dinner with Dominic Rubb the other week, and I've sat round the table today with a Labour and a Conservative, and I like these two. But I go to some tables, and I'm like, I don't like Labour, I don't like Conservative, and I just look to myself, how can I really relate? And a lot of tables I've been around, they push you to one side, and they don't let you speak. So I just like to observe and say, so it's based, how do I relate to that individual? So when a Labour leader is saying common sense and saying something that makes sense and I can relate to it, I'm like, well done. When a Conservative individual MP is saying something that's common sense, I go, well done. So that's my viewpoint.
What do you say about Keir Starmer? I mean, he's being called a bad tribute act in this question. Recently, I'm not a fan. But in the pandemic, I felt he was really strong on the box and held people accountable. So it changes based on when they open their mouths and what they say next. How does it relate to me? Right now, I'm not his biggest fan, and a lot of young people are not either, but a lot of young people are. But my opinion right now is I'm not a fan. I imagine that you're not a fan, Siobhan. Let's get that out of the way first.
Tell myself, I really like listening to the focus groups. I love podcasts, listen to podcasts, and I love listening to people that are running focus groups and listen to people. They think he's quite boring, not really sure what he stands for, and that comes through over and over again. I don't think Blair and Brown would have ever tried to put Corbyn in power. We know Keir Starmer did. He was very close to him. He was running in his shadow cabinet, so he's got all of that kind of baggage laid down. But I mean, for me, listening to Keir Starmer in Parliament, when you can hear him over the drama and the noise, particularly at PMQs, he's just obsessed with Boris. And if there was any analysis done for 2022 on what Keir Starmer's been asking about in Parliament, it's very rarely Ukraine, cost of living, COVID. It's been parties, it's been Boris, it's just gone on and on and on.
Well, maybe because the Prime Minister gives him the excuse to ask about it.
But it's almost, if it wasn't so serious, it'd be almost funny that actually at the run-up to the local elections, after all that work Keir Starmer's done to kind of try and create a scandal and cause drama, he's actually answering questions about Durham Beergate. But I think that it just comes back to this. It's what does he stand for? He made a lot of commitments to the left, very left of his party, trying to get the leadership. He's now moving away from those. We don't really hear much about what his kind of policies are, what the party's policies are. It's all about attack. Kept in hindsight, I think, comes up as well in the focus groups because it's accurate.
Right. Well, we will take more of your calls in a moment. 0345 6060 973. You can text your questions to 84850. It's 8:30 on LBC, and Helen Hodinott has the news headlines.
The UN says around 100 Ukrainian civilians have successfully reached relative safety after leaving Mariopol over the weekend. Earlier, Boris Johnson told Ukraine's parliament the war with Russia is a fight between good and evil. President Biden has vowed to protect access to safe abortions, saying a woman's right to choose is fundamental. A leaked document has revealed the Supreme Court is considering overruling Roe v. Wade, a landmark case which legalised terminations in 1973. And another P&O ferry has failed a re-inspection and is being kept out of service. Today, the company resumed passenger crossings between Dover and Calais for the first time since sacking 800 workers. LBC weather, rain moving across the north this evening and into the south overnight, lows of 6 degrees.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 8:34 on LBC. Just a reminder, on Thursday night at 10 o'clock, I'll be hosting the LBC election night coverage with Jackie Smith. We're going till 6 a.m. That's going to be a bit of a marathon, isn't it? But lots of councils having elections on Thursday. Not actually, I was looking at the map of all the different elections, and if you look at it just geographically, most of Conservative England has not got elections on Thursday. I think nothing west of Somerset, nothing in East Anglia. I think my council is about the only one in Kent. So it's actually in a lot of more Labour areas that there are elections.
But in the cities, it's interesting, isn't it, that in Wales and Scotland you've got uncontested elections. There have been a couple of hundred councillors have already been elected because no one stood against them. There's only one...
Which is appalling, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's only one in England which is uncontested. Yeah. And I think that is pretty terrifying. But it is an urban election by and large. But Northern Ireland's the one to watch.
It absolutely is. Although they're counting on Friday, we will be getting some correspondence from Northern Ireland on the programme. You were listening there to the voice of Stephen Pound, former Labour MP. Ella Whelan is with us, columnist for Spite Online. Jack Parsons is Chief Executive of the Youth Group. And Siobhan Baillie is Conservative MP for Stroud. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to call in with a question, and text 84850. Alex is in Watford. Hello, Alex.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. Does the panel agree the Prime Minister should be more accessible to the press regarding this morning's interview with GMB? It's been 5 years since they've interviewed the man.
Well, it's been 3 years since I have, so I'm not quite up to GMB's pace there. But Ella, let's start with you on this. Obviously, there are so many demands on a politician's time, particularly if they're Prime Minister. We have a plethora of media outlets. It's not just the BBC and ITV as it used to be. We've got all sorts of new entrants to the market as well, all wanting a bit of the Prime Minister's time. Do you think Alex is onto something there, that he should be more accessible or not?
Well, as a journalist, I think I'd probably be shocked if I didn't say yes. I always think that politicians should open themselves up to public scrutiny. But the question is whether it has to be said, I thought Susanna's interview this morning was very good, and I enjoyed it. I thought she had him squirming in the right places at the right time for a lot of it. But I think you have to ask questions about the quality of press interviews, particularly over the last 2 years. I know I keep sounding like I keep hammering on about the pandemic, but some of those press conferences that we were subject to regularly watching from home were pretty excruciating, because you had not the kind of questions that lots of people from the public wanted to know, which was a challenge to the policy questions about whether or not, for example, lockdowns were necessary in the latter parts when we were moving away from emergency, but a kind of dare I even say it, a sort of shrill tone to a lot of the questioning, a sort of panicked sense of driving for further restrictions and more restrictions. And I think that left a lot of people disillusioned with the quality of, to use that term, mainstream media in this country after the pandemic. It's also the case that on the flip side, you listen to Boris this morning or Keir Starmer, and, it is the case that we do, even though that kind of tone of questioning where you keep pushing politicians can get irritating, the level of evasiveness is infuriating. So the fact that they just will not be straight with people, and the whole thing about Partygate or Durham Beergate or whatever it is at the moment is that, or even actually the Angela Rayner story, is that you get this sense that politicians not only have a public and private persona, which is understandable and, that's part of the job, but that their public persona never is anything other than spin and avoidance tactics. And so that leaves, I think, particularly in times of election, it leaves lots of people very frustrated. So whether or not you had Boris Johnson in front of the telly or in front of a mic more often than 5 years for Good Morning Britain, I know he was sort of boycotting Piers Morgan, I'm not sure that you'd get much more out of him.
Piers Morgan is constantly calling you all the names under the sun. I mean, why would you, as a politician, go on a programme when you know the presenter is just going to hurl abuse at you?
Yeah, and fair enough. And, the I think some of the style of questioning of this with, I'm not making any sort of disparaging comments about Piers Morgan at the moment, but there's a lot of presenters out there who are guilty of wanting to hear more of their voice than they do of the...
Anyway, that's enough from you, Ella.
Talk to the hand.
Siobhan.
It's a really interesting point. I saw the note.
That's the sort of thing politicians say, isn't it?
But I think whether he's been on GMB recently or not, he's been everywhere and he's out and about about. And there are, a massive range, and he speaks to camera, he talks to people, through social media as well. He uses that, and he was on the telly box every single day during the pandemic when they were having those press conferences. So I think access to the Prime Minister is there, and he is, he loves people. He wants to communicate. He's a communicator. He enjoys it. He was a journalist by trade,
but
so
he
he
does
understands.
tend to, or either he or his team do tend, and this morning I think was an exception, but do tend to pick interviewers who they think are maybe going to give him a bit of an easy time.
Well, I mean, I'm not in his press. I'm not in his press pack. I'm not in the advisor or the inner circle in that respect. But certainly, I think you're right. If you know that an interviewer isn't going to listen, she's going to shout you down. What's the point of spending your precious time as Prime Minister when you've got a lot to do and you've got to get messages out there, because that's your job, in spending your time with those interviewers? I know a lot of the public get really, they get quite naffed off with people being interrupted all the time, not being allowed to answer questions. But equally, I think Ella's right, politicians have an absolute reputation for not answering the questions. I mean, I have gone down rabbit holes of journalists trying to answer questions, because journalists are much more experienced than I am, and I'm trying to answer the questions, and they can get you into different places. So I can see how politicians end up sort of actually trying just run through their lines and just keeping everything safe. I'm not a member of the government, so I've got a lot more freedom, but it's a skill. It's a skill.
Well, you haven't really got the freedom, have you? Because if you want to be a member of the government, you know that if you come on this programme and say, well, of course Boris Johnson should appear, he should come on your programme every week.
Well, they did promote me into government, and I quit, so I think I probably shot my own fox. No, I just quit because I just wanted to learn my job properly. They did promote me quite quickly to PPS. So, but in any event, but I think there's a lot. But I think public perception of access to politicians, are probably most of the time don't want to hear from us all the time. But I do think the Prime Minister is out there and is answering the questions and the questions of the day.
Stephen, it is a difficult balance to strike, isn't it?
I'm at a bit of a disadvantage, Harry, because I thought this was about the GMB union. When they're talking about why, I was about to say the GMB is one of the most important unions in this country.
You're as bad as Boris not knowing who Lorraine is.
I do know who Lorraine is. But it's an interesting point. I mean, oddly enough, I am actually on another programme tomorrow with Gloria De Piero, who was one of Tony Blair's favourite when he came to interview him. But you do choose that. But on the other hand, where the hell do you stop? I think there's never been a time in history when politicians have been more open and more accessible, whether they want to or not. The days when Anthony Eden could come back into Croydon Airport and say, have you anything to say to the people? Say, no, thanks for asking. Marvellous days. I mean, you wouldn't have liked it, Iain, but I think now they do. And are you going to really get into a tick box and say, hang on a second, you've not been on Radio Solway Firth, the fishing hour, or something, or Stroud FM. I mean, why not?
Do you remember when Tony Blair was criticised for appearing on programmes like This Morning, the sort of sofa television?
I know.
But the reason he did it was because he was talking to a different audience than watch political programmes or listen to programmes like this. They were real people, probably doing something while they were watching him, and it worked for him.
Well, that was the plan for him to go to speak to the Women's Institute. And that went well.
That didn't go very well, did it?
Was that the slow hand clap?
We all remember that.
Podcasts are another medium, and I listen to loads of podcasts because I have to move between the constituency. I know you do. They're all on my WhatsApp. But so I think that's another medium for hearing from politicians and hear. But I think it is. You can't spread yourself too thin.
No, it's just thinking while you guys were talking. It's also the case that Twitter has become this indispensable tool for journalists, because politicians often are far more honest on there, and they sometimes slip up much more easily. Twitter is essentially giving them enough rope to hang themselves with their own words better than any journalist could do most of the time. But it's also a problem because you can tell in the Commons that lots of MPs are making their speeches to the Twitter audience, to the Twitter crowd, and they're ticking the right boxes, they're hitting the right keywords to set off those hashtags and all of that, and so it becomes kind of degrading. So there is a skill to public. There's a skill to talking to the public, and while Twitter has its upsides because you can kind of the mask slip sometimes, it's also the case that I think too many politicians think that talking to the public is talking to Twitter, and it's not.
Jack, do you think that the Prime Minister should be more accessible to the press?
Less is more. If you answer the questions.
That's profound.
Yes, and have trust contracts. I think if you, less is more, but also consistency. When are you expected to come on? And so someone doesn't go quiet and then they jump up and they do 20 interviews and then go quiet again. So consistency is key, and less is more. And when you're on the shows like GMTV today, this morning, it's Good Morning Britain. Oh, is that what it's called now? It's really important that you actually have a conversation rather than reacting. You need to respond.
I think you've hit on something really important there, because I always thought that a prime ministerial interview ought to have a sense of occasion about it. And David Cameron, I think, was the one that really, he would comment on the death of some minor celebrity as if that was something that he should really be doing. And Margaret Thatcher would give interviews to sort of Brian Walden, Robin Day, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, and they would be occasions. There'd be long interviews. They were searching interviews. She would prepare for them. But now you kind of see the Prime Minister on your television screens virtually every day in some capacity.
I always think of Deirdre Rashid from Coronation Street. I mean, Tony
Deirdre
Blair...
Barlow as was.
Let's not...
Deirdre.
Yeah. Tony Blair felt it necessary to actually commiserate with it for the... was it the death
Samir.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, he'd fallen into the canal, hadn't he?
Indeed. It happens in Manchester.
Too much rain.
And I thought that is so different to, to take a sort of slightly egregious one. You think of Roosevelt with the fireside chats, which revolutionised contact between politicians and the people, and which was actually written by Eleanor Roosevelt. But he used to give and use radio to speak, and then obviously Hitler. Then Himmler gave free radios to people so they could listen to his speeches. So, but it was, as you say, a sense of occasion. And we can all hear, Chamberlain's "and I have received no such assurance," and all those great big speeches. I think less is more. I hate to say this, but I'd like to vote for you, Jeff. You strike me as someone who's a breath of fresh air.
Alex in Watford, let's go back to you. Would you like to see more of Boris Johnson being interviewed on the broadcast media?
Most definitely, but one thing nobody hasn't picked up, excuse me, the Prime Minister didn't know how much a carer allowance had gone up. Now, to me, that is disgusting. The man should know exactly how people of this country are suffering, and he didn't know the answer to that increase in the carer's allowance.
Does anybody here know what the increase in the carer's allowance is?
It's variable.
A couple of pounds.
It's variable because it's income-based.
Yeah.
Right. Alex, thank you very much for that. That's Alex in Watford there. If you'd like to ask our panel a question, 0345 6060 973. It's 8:47.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Boris Johnson will be the first world leader to address the Ukrainian parliament. The Ukrainian ambassador to the United Kingdom, Vadim Pristaiko, joins us from 10 Downing Street. What do you understand to be the relationship between the two men, Prime Minister Johnson and President Zelensky?
There is some chemistry which appeared to be from the first meeting, and it was the first visit of President Zelensky almost 2 years ago. The UK is helping us enormously. That's why all the MPs are gathering in the Parliament building, although the city has been bombed by Russians regularly.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Wait. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Some shapes.
8:49 is the time on LBC. Siobhan Baillie, Jack Parsons, Ella Whelan and Stephen Pound with me taking your calls and texts. And here's a text from Chris, who says he's driving so he can't ring in. He writes, the so-called city upon a hill, the beacon of light across the world, is now facing law changes to women's rights in different states based on or depending on religious ideology, bigotry or belief. So can anybody tell me the difference today if this happens between the Middle East and the United States? Well, that's an interesting one. Siobhan.
Well, I mean, this is a huge story. So the idea that there's been a leak from the Supreme Court to suggest that the Roe v. Wade decision from the 73, I think,
73, yeah,
will be overturned has rocked America. I think it's quite easy to see that even from our vantage point. I think it sounds to me that if that is the decision, that it will be a huge backward step, trying to sort of people talk about abortion rights very much about female sort of rights and women's rights, but it's health, it's relationships, it's about control and domestic violence, it's just about choice. And I think it's going to be a really big political ding dong for a while there, but rightly so because it's so serious.
And Ella Whelan, it will split the country, won't it? Because what this is apparently going to do is allow states to make their own decisions. So you'll have many southern states effectively banning abortion, and the more sort of liberal Midwest northern state or eastern states, they will presumably still allow it. I mean, it's. Well, you tell me what you think.
Well, there has been some people, I think there was an article on The Spectator today, arguing that this isn't really, that actually this is about a question of democracy and whether, questioning the whole idea that unelected judges should make such a decision based on their opinions rather than citizens within a state making the decision. The idea that this is solely what this is about is a nonsense. We're not talking about questioning the Supreme Court. We're talking about the Supreme Court judges deciding to change Roe v. Wade with the full knowledge that across the United States there are a large number of states who have legislation in the wings waiting to come in, which would completely ruin a lot of women's lives and ruin their chances to have access to abortion services, close some of the few centres that are available for abortion services in some of the states, and would bring many women in America back to the dark ages. But there is it is an interesting question, and there's an interesting conundrum going on in America at the moment, because coming out of all the discussions about vaccine mandates and mask mandates, a large section of the American right started making some very convincing arguments about bodily autonomy. And you even had, protests all across from Indiana to Arizona and everywhere else, with people coming out and saying, my body, my choice, that old pro-choice slogan. And the tragedy for my comrades in the pro-choice movement is that lots of people are so unwilling to reach across the political divide that they haven't made good on getting those people who have suddenly become interested in bodily autonomy to defend women's bodily autonomy. Because if you believe that government shouldn't force you to stick a needle in your arm because your medical choices are private, well, then you surely don't think that government should stick their noses into a woman's pregnancy and whether or not she wants to carry it to term. I could go off on one about the importance of women's choice. I think Siobhan's made it very convincingly that this is about abortion rights. It's not just about healthcare, it's about a fundamental moral question of women's choice. And, the city upon the hill, the beacon of light, is supposed to be a representative of the free world. And America, the exciting things about America and its constitution are all based around ideas of freedom of conscience, freedom of choice, freedom to make your, the American dream, to have the aspiration and the space to make decisions about your own life and make your life better. Why does that not apply to women? I think that's a question that a lot of the American right need to start answering, that why they extend freedom to themselves but not to women in some states. And, I don't think that should turn into a kind of handmaidens on the one hand saying, oh, you're all evil and sexist, versus this kind of bizarre claim that women are hell-bent on infanticide, but actually crossing that polar divide and saying, what is the moral question here? Is it about bodily autonomy? If it is, then we share common ground.
Okay, Jack?
I'm really upset because this has opened so many experience that young women in our community who's gone through abortion, it's brought it to the front for again after they've gone through therapy or whatever they've gone to for the support. So I'm now thinking and looking, where are the support networks? They need to be on the top of the news. So anyone who's suffering right now, whether it is a past experience or current experience in the UK, we need to give them the support and open the lines.
But do you think what's happening in America could affect the debate here? Because really, abortion hasn't been at the top of the political agenda for a long time, and many people think, well, good thing too. I mean, there have been occasional debates about term limits, but that's as far as it's gone. Whereas in America, as long as I've ever been going to America, it's been something that has really divided society.
Absolutely, and we look at America and we look at them, look what they're doing, and we've got a lot of Americans living in the country as well who become British citizens as well. So absolutely, this is going to have a knock-on effect, and we're around the table talking about it right now. And I'm just for all the young people that are going through it, single parents as well. I grew up in a single parents household in a council estate. For me, I'm looking at the support. Where are the support networks, and what can I do to support?
Now to our resident Catholic voice, Stephen Pound.
The American Civil War was actually fought about states' rights. It wasn't fought about slavery. And I think it's a false analogy to actually compare vaccines to a fetus, a life. And I think life is the difference here. I think that, like Joe Biden, I believe that there are cases, where the woman's health is threatened, in cases of incest, in cases of rape. How can any Christian possibly stand by and say, you have to carry that child to full term? But we're then in an incredibly difficult sort of theological position, as well as a philosophical one, about the life. Do you have the right to actually take that life? And I think ultimately we have to accept that the woman does have a right. And I don't think there's any way around that. We can end up in a situation in Poland where you get introduced this thing, there's absolutely no exceptions whatsoever. And in Texas, where you could actually be sent to prison for facilitating someone to have a termination. I mean, that is absurd. And don't forget, in America, they shoot people in the clinics. You've seen these terrifying things that are happening. So I really wish that we could somehow sort of demystify and de-terrify this particular subject, because the importance of a life is absolutely crucial. Nothing on this planet is as important as human life. And I think we're losing track of that because it's become in a sort of an argument about feminism, it's an argument about states' rights, and it's an argument about frothing Republican knuckle draggers. I wish we could be a little bit calmer about it. All I can say is there is no
Why is that? Why haven't we fallen victim to this terrible debate that has been polluting American politics really ever since Roe was swayed, and probably before?
I think the point that you make about what the impact in the UK is, I think the impact in the UK would actually be advantageous from your perspective on this one.
From my perspective? What's my perspective?
Your perspective of it as a liberal person on this one, who is by and large in favour of women's rights, and the discussions that we...
By and large, he says.
I used to be a politician.
It just strikes me as inconceivable that a woman's worth and her freedoms only become of value when she is raped. Or when she is a victim of incest. I know, but it's a religious position, and I understand the question of the importance of life. And actually, as someone who's pregnant myself at the moment, once you have a pregnancy that is wanted, that you're looking forward to that baby being born, the life inside me that's growing had significance and emotion for me from the minute I saw its first heartbeat. But for a woman
Is this your first?
Yes, this is my first and fourth time on IVF, so I'm hoping. Wow. It means a lot to me. But for women who have unwanted pregnancies, for whatever reason, whether it is that she's victim of a crime, or actually that she's made a mistake with contraception, or actually that she's broken up with her boyfriend and has decided that this isn't a thing that's viable or of want for her any longer, that is very different to, and the way in which we weigh up lives. And just a point on the UK perspective, the thing about the UK is because we have the 67 Act, we have this kind of workaround, but you have to remind people that abortion is it's not legal in this country. It's still technically illegal, but there's this legal workaround whereby women have to basically convince two doctors that they're either going to harm themselves, or that they'll go mad, or that they'll be impeded in some way medically or physically if they take the baby to term. Now that doesn't smell like women's freedom to me. That smells like a workaround.
Siobhan?
Just to say, I mean, we have got into a situation in this country where we can have a respectful conversation, we can respect religious views, and I get emails on both sides of this argument. When we were looking at telemedicine for abortion services in Parliament the other week, I was really, really impassioned emails. But ultimately, we do need to also remember that this is a leak from the Supreme Court.
Yes.
We don't really know.
It has actually been verified.
It's verified, but we don't know. There's been other cases where they've changed their mind in the process of it. It's the first draft, I think. So there may be. We don't know the actual final position. We do need to know that, and America certainly does. And it'll be a very sorry situation in my view, and a backward step. But I think let's continue to be respectful about.
And this was going to happen the minute
here.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, God rest her soul, and the minute Aliotta and the other people got elected, it was going to happen. We knew it was going to happen. And I think if you read the leak from Justice Aliotta's opinion today, it is written in the most brutal terms. I mean, it is actually talking about the unconstitutionality of the Texas judgment in 1973 in absolutely unequivocal terms.
Well, I think we will return to this on the programme because it has been news that's broken today, and we may do a phone-in on it because it's actually a long time since I've done a phone-in on this subject. Final text from Gina in Essex. Boris Johnson sparked ridicule this morning when he appeared to not know who Lorraine Kelly was when referenced by Susanna Reid. Do you know who she is, and what are your cultural black spots? Jack?
I do know who she is, and... When he said that, it made me giggle because that's Boris for you. And
do you think he genuinely didn't know who she was, or it was a bit put on?
I'm trying to remember if he'd slept.
Well, looking in his eyes,
say that.
Well, you don't know what's going through his mind. I think he knows who she is.
Do you have any cultural black spots?
I don't actually know what that really means.
Well, sort of an area of our national life that you just aren't interested in. I mean, I wouldn't, if you said a rap artist to me, I probably wouldn't have a clue who they were.
Oh, well, in that case, anything before 2002.
It's like me with films before 1980, not interested. Ella?
Well, it is a bit embarrassing that he didn't know Lorraine, and yes, I know who Lorraine is. But it seemed to me a bit like, we always watch politicians choking down bacon sandwiches and like trying to come up with be down with the kids or down with the kind of the working class in this really crass way when it's like, well, did you expect Boris Johnson to be watching Lorraine? No. So should he have to pretend? What's the worth in that? My cultural black spot is football, and I have too many times tried to pretend like I know something about football and been caught out. I think actually you've made me sweat a few times on your show, Ian, with questions about football, and there's something in me that says I should know about it, but I just can't retain any names of the players.
Who are Eintracht Frankfurt playing on Thursday in the semi-finals of the Europa League?
You see, I could mortify myself by pretending to know, but I've come to an age.
I support West Ham. So that's the answer.
River blowing.
Thank you, Siobhan.
I actually watched that final bit and I wasn't convinced that he was kind of thinking through who Lorraine was, whether it was anything to do with the television or anything. But ultimately, I'd much prefer politicians to be honest about what they do and don't know than try and fake their football teams or whatever.
He couldn't actually say if he was honest, first of all, in that interview, could he? He said, well, yes.
She's got a pulse, I think.
No.
That is bad. She pushed him she pushed him and he answered.
Okay.
He answered a straight question. Cultural black spot for me is TikTok and all the influencers and all the celebrity
You should be on
celebrities at the
TikTok.
moment. I haven't got there yet.
Talk to Caleb out there. He got me on
he can
TikTok,
get me on
and he's
TikTok.
doing a very good job
But
for
my
me.
cultural top spot is I love Coronation Street.
Yeah, me too.
I love
Do you
it.
know that nobody knows what Frankfurt Eintracht means? Because Eintracht Frankfurt is an untranslatable word.
Right. Do you have a cultural black spot? We need to get to the news. We're already far too late.
Well, rap and TikTok.
Okay, fine. Stephen Pound, Siobhan Baillie, Alan Whelan and Jack Parsons, thank you very much for joining us. We'll have another edition of Cross Question tomorrow. Coming up in a moment, we're going to be talking about Ukraine, Boris Johnson's speech to the Ukrainian Parliament, and wondering if our efforts on the military front are being undermined by the lamentable performance by the government on refugees. You're listening to Iain Dale. It's 9:03.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, a steel plant in the Ukrainian city of Mariopol is reportedly under attack by Russian forces again, with hundreds of civilians trapped inside. The UN says it has successfully evacuated around 100 people from the site.